Well, welcome to All Classic Car, and in this video we'll be taking a look at the motorist's best friend, the trusty starting handle, a thing of many uses. Now really, up until the 1960s, give or take, starting handles were very common things to come across, and they literally push in through here, and you guide it through the front panel, and in theory it lines up with the dog that's on the front of the crankshaft. And there we go, that's on. Now it's at this point that if you've got sagging engine mounts or some misalignment issues, if that handle doesn't go into the dog on the front of the crankshaft, then you've got other problems to look at. So that is now connected, and obviously the main function of a starting handle is to start the engine, but they do also have many other uses for any scenario where you need to turn the engine over slowly. Now let's just have a quick think about some of those. One obvious one is setting the ignition points. When you need to set the points, clean the points, check the points, the heel of the rotors, the heel of the ignition points needs to be in a certain position relative to the cam that turns around inside, so you can turn the engine on the handle until it's at the point that you need it to work. Same with the timing, you can set the timing by carefully turning the engine on the handle. You don't have that level of finesse when you're spinning it on the starter or anything like that. You don't really want to be grabbing fan blades to pull the engine round, obviously not running, because you risk damaging the fan blades and possibly one coming off. So the handle is very useful in that scenario. And the other time it comes in useful is if you need to move a car that's perhaps not running or stuck in mud, or for whatever reason the engine won't start. Because if you pop it into gear, handbrake off, etc., and you turn it on the handle, you can slowly move the car that way. So if it's stuck in mud, a car that you found that isn't a runner, but as long as the engine turns and the clutch and everything are behaving, you can pop it into gear, turn it on the handle, and it'll slowly wind it out of wherever it's stuck. So that's another bonus of cars that have a starting handle. But of course the main reason for having a starting handle is to start the car up. Now why would you need to use a starting handle? Usually it's if the battery itself has packed up, or it's very weak, discharged for whatever reason, perhaps the car's been sat for a long time, etc. But as long as there is some life in the battery, there's a good chance you'll be able to start the engine on the handle if it's a good starter to begin with. The battery plays two parts on a car like this when it comes to starting the engine. One, it provides the feed to the ignition. Now you don't need much power in the battery to provide a feed to the ignition side of things. You do need a lot of power in the battery to turn the starter, and if the battery is starting to fade, then it may not have the oomph to turn the starter and turn the engine over, but there may be enough life in it to provide the spark, in which case you can manually turn the engine using the starting handle, and you've got a chance of getting running. I remember years ago when I ran my A40 every day, sometimes in the winter, which is usually when failing batteries make themselves known, it wouldn't start of a morning, but there was enough life when you turn the key to the ignition light to come on and provide a spark, so you'd whiz the handle out of the boot, pop it in the front of the car, and it would start quite readily on the handle. So let's see if that will work in this case. Now there are a few things to bear in mind when starting a car on a handle. The first thing to do, there's an aeroplane flying over, that's handy. The first thing to do is make sure the handbrake is on. Secondly, that the car is out of gear, because the last thing you want is the engine springing into life in gear while you're stood in front of it, because that could get a bit messy. So what else do we need to do when thinking about starting the car on the handle? Now obviously if you're starting a car on a handle, you want to maximise the chances of it starting sooner rather than later. And again, on these older cars, on the mechanical fuel pump, you have a priming lever, which is this lever here. Now sometimes replacement pumps, in this case this is an AC pump, a lot of replacement pumps don't have a priming lever on them, but fortunately this one does. And what it does is it allows you to manually pump up fuel into the carburetor, so that saves churning away, pulling fuel all the way up from the tank into here. So you're starting your start procedure with fuel already up here. So the thing to do is give that a prime, and you can listen in the float chamber to hear gurgling as the fuel gets primed up from the tank through the pump and into the float chamber. So let's just give that a whirl. So that sounded like it's doing something. You probably can't hear this, but you can feel when it's pumping, and you can feel when it's stopping doing anything. Right, so that's not doing anything now. So that tells me that we've got fuel up to here, so that's a good thing. So I won't be manually turning the engine on the starter just to pull fuel up, so that's good. So next thing to do is you pop the starting handle in. So like I say, you push it in until it engages with the dog on the front of the crankshaft. And if you look down there, I'm not sure if we can see this, but there's the starting handle and there's the dog on the front of the crankshaft. I'll try zooming in and just see if we can see that somewhere. There it is. So that there is a starter handle, and that's the dog on the front of the crank. So if I now turn the handle, it turns the engine. So we've primed up the fuel manually into the carburetor. The handle is now in place. Now, if the engine is a good runner, you don't need to be churning it away like this, as if you're stirring a tin of paint. You don't need to do that. So let's go in and check the status in here. So, like I say, make sure the brake's on if you need it. The important thing is to make sure the gears are in neutral. Now, we pop the ignition on. We can see there are signs of life, because when you turn the ignition on, the ammeter flickers, as does the fuel gauge. So the ignition is now on. It's out of gear, handbrake's on if you need it. So we've got fuel up, ignition is on, so hopefully it won't take too many turns on the handle. Now this is the time to point out how to hold the handle. Now you might think that's a simple procedure, but trust me, you can get this wrong. When you grab the handle, it's important that your thumb is well out of the way. The reason for this is, if the engine kicks back, you can easily break your thumb. So don't grab it like that. What you want to do is you want to grab it with your thumb out of the way, so that if the engine kicks back and flicks that way, it just shoots out of your grip. It doesn't take your thumb with it. But if you're like that and the engine suddenly goes, then it can cause problems. So you always hold it like that with your thumb out of the way. Right, I'll go and find the tripod and then let's go and give this a try, see if the theory actually works in practice. Be nice to me, Ford. Now I haven't actually tried this today, so let's see what happens. The idea is to turn it over by hand slowly until you can feel it coming up onto compression. And then once you feel it just before it's reached the top of compression, that's when you flick it over, keeping your thumb out of the way, and hopefully it'll catch. So let's see what happens. Thumb. Just turn it over slowly. And then I think we'll go for a start. There we go. Honestly, I haven't tried that today. That's the first time with the handle I've given it a go. So if the engine is a good starter and you've got faith in the engine being pretty well set up, then there's a good chance it'll start that way. So even if you've got a very weak battery that won't power the starter sufficiently to turn the engine over of a morning, as long as you've got enough juice in the battery to get the ignition light on and create a spark, there's a good chance that by manually turning it over with the starting handle, you'll be able to get your engine running. Just one of the many benefits of playing with these older cars that came with starting handles as standard. So, I hope that was of interest. Like I say, very useful things, these starting handles. If you haven't got any other tools that were originally supplied with your car from new, if nothing else, have a starting handle close by, because it gives you way more options if you need to move the car or to get it running when the battery is in a poor state. She's sounding quite happy. So, thanks for watching. Please check out some of the other side valve Ford videos and the other classic car videos on the channel. That's it for now. More videos very soon. Bye for now.